The greatest gift we can give anyone is the gift of honesty.
Yeah.
And it is true. It may lead to consequences such as she decides she's not willing to live with that. Although I will say it's not our experience that that's often where it leads. When things are done well and in a right timing and there's enough support, there's always that fear, though, which is really one of the reasons someone does lie in the first place, that they will lose the very person that they want to be with. But I tell them that to live in craziness and all the things it causes, not only to us mentally, but physically, is really damaging. And so if they really love this person, their spouse or partner, and they want to gift them with the greatest gift, to take the risk that they may not have what they have, but they are giving this person the gift of truth.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we've got a great conversation between Debbie Laaser, Director of Faithful and True, and Tammy Gustafson from the Betrayal Healing Conference. Debbie and Tammy will be talking about full disclosure for couples navigating relational betrayal. This episode is called The Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. Now, here's Debbie Laaser and Tammy Gustafson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Betrayal Healing Conference. I'm Tammy Gustafson with Betrayal Healing, and I am so honored to have Debbie Laaser joining us from Faithful and True. And she is going to be talking about a crucial topic, and that's full disclosure. So first, I want to introduce Debbie to you a little bit. You guys may know her particularly from Shattered Vows, but Debbie is a licensed marriage and family therapist and was involved in recovery with her husband, Mark, for over 30 years. She and her husband, Mark, co-founded Faithful and True, which is a Christian counseling center treating men struggling with sexual addiction and their spouses. She has facilitated groups, individual counseling, and intensive for betrayed wives for over 20 years. Debbie authored From Trauma to Transformation, Shattered Vows, and co-authored 7 Desires and a Toolkit for Growth with her husband, Mark. She also published research entitled Post-Traumatic Growth in Relationally Betrayed Women, which is available on their website. Since Mark's death in 2019, Debbie has continued to counsel and direct the growth of Faithful and True in the Minneapolis area. Debbie, thanks so much for being back and joining us. So good to have you.
Tammy. It's always great to be with you and your audience here. So hope we have some more helpful information today.
So I love this topic. I think it's one that is so important to cover with full disclosure. Because really, when life flows up and there's a discovery or disclosure, really it starts the process. And I think this is such a critical piece if the relationship is going to heal. Like, she can heal with or without it. It's harder without it, right? But she can heal. But I would just love to hear from you. Let's dive in as far as really unpack for us why a full disclosure is so important when you've been betrayed. And, sometimes women get the message of, hey, why don't you just forgive and forget? So why do we even have to do this? Like, can you speak to that as well, why that doesn't work?
Well, what I'd like to say generally, right from the beginning, is that we're very intuitive people. And whether you approach this from a spiritual aspect or not, I believe there is this spirit within us that is very intuitive. Sometimes we call it red flags or hunches or gut feelings. And what is true is everyone, even small children, have these feelings that are inside of them to try to make sense of reality. One of the things that happens when we're living in a relationship where truth is not being told, and there are secrets or lying or hiding of some kind, is that our internal reality, as I call it, what we believe is true by all of these intuitive things we've been fed along the way, and the external reality, or what we've been told by the person that we've been betrayed by, do not match up. And when they don't match up, what happens is we have this tension going on between our internal and our external reality. And this tension is really what I like to describe as the craziness we feel in our brain.
Yes.
Because, and almost anyone I talk with, and I know it was true for me, there is this sense of feeling crazy for a long time, or even others telling us we were the problem, or there was so much lack of what was true that at some point we don't know what is true and what isn't true. I believe this craziness factor also seeps into our emotional health. And for a lot of us, we have experienced physical symptoms, sometimes major. I did myself, almost a TIA, as I describe it in my Shattered Vows book, where I said I didn't have any information, but what I know now is my body carried a lot of information, even though I hadn't heard the words from Mark.
Yeah.
So I always tell men when I'm talking to them about the need to be a truth teller, is that I think the greatest gift we can give anyone is the gift of honesty.
Yeah.
And it is true. It may lead to consequences, such as she decides she's not willing to live with that. Although I will say it's not our experience that that's often where it leads. When things are done well and in a right timing and there's enough support, there's always that fear, though, which is really one of the reasons someone does lie in the first place, that they will lose the very person that they want to be with. But I tell them that to live in craziness and all the things it causes, not only to us mentally, but physically, is really damaging. And so if they really love this person, their spouse or partner, and they want to gift them with the greatest gift, to take the risk that they may not have what they have, but they are giving this person the gift of truth. So we like to start from there, and we really believe that if we're going to grow a relationship or a marriage, we have to start with truth telling. And therefore, the forgive and forget messages, or enough that, I don't want to make you sadder or madder than you already are. You basically have the gist of what I've done, is not enough. And usually it leads to installment plans, as I call them, a little bit of information now, a little bit more in another week or a month when something else comes up and you maybe ask another question. All of those continue to really erode your brain and your sense of reality.
Well, Debbie, I really appreciate you bringing in, because I don't think I've heard it quite come at it from that angle before, but you're right. The felt sense, and when you're told that your reality is different, when they're saying like, hey, something feels like it's off, and he's like, no, nothing's wrong. Like, wait, that disconnect, oh my gosh, it's really questioning. It really puts your reality into question. And then it can become that you start to question yourself as well, of like, oh, maybe I can't trust myself because when I'm told that is different. So I really appreciate you highlighting that piece. So many women have probably had the experience of their partner saying, I answered all your questions. Like, what else do you want to know? So can you speak to that, of when the truth seems to be based solely on asking the right questions in the right way at the right time, and why that doesn't qualify as a full disclosure?
Well, I call it the Monica Lewinsky issue, is that if we haven't asked our question in just the right way or used the right words or whatever, there is also the possibility that someone will, answer it in a different, untruthful way. More importantly than that, though, Tammy, is I think our desire to use a tool like full disclosure to lead to something good, and that good would be to help build trust. Because one of the things that is so shattered when we have not had the truth from someone we're living very close to is a sense that we're not safe with that person, and that is about losing trust with them. If we're going to build trust, then building trust is about knowing that this person will offer us truth in any and all situations, so that we don't have to be guessing, we don't have to be asking about it. And that's the problem with asking questions. We could ask 1,000 questions or 10,000 questions, and we still maybe haven't asked the exact right question. And furthermore, after a disclosure, the idea is that we want our spouse to offer information about himself, not only about what he's doing, but what he's thinking and feeling and needing. That's the part of vulnerability. And we want to grow vulnerability in the relationship. And so we can't do that through asking questions. And the truth is, that's a piece of her work as well, is to figure out, instead of asking questions, how else she can be vulnerable by sharing what she's feeling, thinking, and needing. So it's a piece for both of them to work on. But in terms of full disclosure, we work with men in creating a timeline where they can offer a lot of information to her to fill in all of these puzzle pieces that are missing. You know, as I liken it to like working on a crossword puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. You know, when you have one of these 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles and you spend all this time putting all these pieces in place, and then you're missing like 5 pieces at the end.
Oh,
It's
so frustrating.
And you'll go to any lengths to see where in the world those might be. I have even put a piece of paper behind my puzzle and colored it in a color that was sort of like what it should be, because I needed the whole thing to look right. And that's really kind of how it is for us. We want every piece that will speak to our reality to be in place so that we can move forward from that place and continue that offering to build closeness in our relationship.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more and more specifically about what a full disclosure actually is? Not necessarily the process of sharing it, we'll get to that, but like the work that men need to do in preparing this. Can you explain what that actually is and what they're preparing?
What they're preparing is really a lifetime of what sexual development has looked like for them. And I will say that this is our process at Faithful and True, and it may not be what others believe in or use themselves. However, we have been doing full disclosures for many, many years. Mark and I began doing them together, and we've been tweaking them along the way to keep adding more helpful things, create more safety in the process. And so we feel very good about what we do at our center. So I may sound a little opinionated, and I guess the truth is I am.
Go for it.
Well, what I would say is that we want to hear the whole story, and there's several reasons for that. So we start from the beginning, from birth to the present. And we have him create a timeline of what happened. Generally, a 5-year increment works well because there's before school, sometimes those elementary school years, middle school, high school, college, and so forth. But we want to know and hear, and we want her to hear also about what's happened in his life. What was he exposed to early on that was perhaps way before a time when a young person should even know about sex, let alone possibly witness sexual acts, from some homes to being abused himself by others, and that would be a part of the sexual development. As you continue creating that story, again, the story he will offer, it moves into how he perhaps started to act out. Was it with pornography, or did that start the whole journey? Was it playing doctor with neighborhood people? Was it eventually in elementary school, you know, kind of corralling that girl you've always really liked in the coat room? At least that's how it was for me. And giving her a kiss. You know, where did it start playing itself out? So that would be a part of those young years where you're not even a couple yet. And what our belief, and I can explain a little more about why we do it from back then, but then we move in 5-year increments through his entire life. It does include those dating years, pre-marriage years, early marriage, middle, late marriage, all of it. And again, a lot of people just do disclosure from marriage on. And it's amazing how many wives are really upset by maybe what happened in that 6 months to a year prior to their marriage, when they had committed to being exclusively for each other, and that wasn't even happening at that time. So important to get the whole story out. The reason we do start from the beginning is that there is a core belief that all men carry who are struggling with sex addiction. And one of those is, if you really knew me, you would most likely hate me and leave me. It's the core belief that really leads to a lot of lying or not being honest with people in general, whether it's your wife or your best friend or your Bible study group or whatever. Because being fully known is so terrifying. They can't imagine that somebody would still actually value them and love them if they knew the whole story. Also, in the progression of things, I like to teach women prior to disclosure what some of the components of an addiction is, so that she can watch for them. Because one of the components is there is progression. If something is actually addictive, it will be like alcohol, whereas one beer early on when you're 14, if you've tried it, gives you a pretty good buzz. But if you keep doing that, it's not going to do its job and medicate you in the way you want to be. You're going to need a six-pack, or maybe you're going to need to switch to something a little stronger as time goes on. There is progression because the brain needs more of what you're putting in it so that it can create those neurochemicals to create the high you need to medicate feelings. So I want a wife to know that, because otherwise she's going to watch and see and hear how it's progressed for her husband. And by the time he gets to the end, she's just going to feel hopeless, capital H. On the other hand, if I forewarned her that I would expect she's going to see progression, watch for it, see how it's happening. And when he hasn't had help, that's what we will expect to see. It creates, it doesn't eliminate pain, and it creates more understanding for her, at least in the process.
Yeah. So, absolutely. So the full disclosure at its basic level is a written timeline of all of it. Could be like you guys do, it could be pre-marriage and that sexual development. And then certainly once marriage hit, and there's sexual acting out, then it's listing all the sexual acting out. So she has all the information. Does that sum it up well?
And I would say bullet points is what we encourage, because when he shares and offers this information to her, we don't want him reading a letter. I've heard of some people that do letter writing in terms of full disclosure. And what we know about letter writing is it distracts him from eye contact with her.
Oh,
when
interesting.
The sharing is going on, and we want eye contact. We want him to see how she's responding, and we want her to see how he is. And oftentimes when that connection is made, you start seeing tears and sadness start to come up in both of them. And that is even part of a connection in something very hard. Reading a letter, I've even heard recently of somebody who gave a friend the letter in a group to read to the wife without her husband even reading it. So it was facts, but it was without the emotional side of it. We truly would not propose to do it that way. So bullet points are what we expect, and what's included in that would take a long time to describe possibly, but when you think about whatever is important to build reality for her is what we want to include. It's not okay to say, well, I was kind of in pornography ever since I was 14, even kind of lately. No, that's not enough. When did it start for you? And how did it progress over time? And of course, that will come up in the 5-year segments as he's sharing. It won't be all one statement about pornography, but maybe how much money was spent, how much time was spent. What was he telling her to find the time? For a lot of our relationships, that time was found because he couldn't sleep, supposedly, and stayed up late, and she went to bed because she had kids to manage the next morning or whatever. And then she learns that was really just an excuse, or staying at work late, or I waited till you were out of town and then I knew I had some nice concentrated time for myself. It's important for her to know that, because again, no doubt she's had some sense, or even caught him doing something if she happened to wake up and he wasn't in bed, let's just say, and she went looking for him. Yeah. So information that, again, puts all those puzzle pieces back to place. That's what we want.
Well, and I think, too, there's also that sense of anything he is withholding, any secrecy, the relationship can't heal until there's full honesty, until everything's out there. And honestly, he's not going to get freedom until that happens as well. So,
speaking of that, Tammy, for some of our couples, there's a lot of secrecy around money, for instance.
Oh,
or drinking along with sexual activity.
Totally.
And we need to listen to what she needs. Sometimes we want to include both of those things in the full disclosure, or have an additional session where he is speaking to how he's hidden money or even does now, and where is it? And that could be one of the questions for sexual full disclosure is, where did you get the money to, pay for prostitutes or go to strip clubs, when she basically manages the money of the family. So those are important questions for her to know.
And I think for everyone listening, I think this can also give a really good demonstration of why it's so important to have someone walking you through this, somebody who really understands and specializes in this. Because, I mean, Debbie, you just listed so many great questions. And for a wife who is going through this, there are things that she won't even think to ask. And also there's ways to help protect her within this process. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to hear when, let's start with what is the process of preparation? How do you guys do that? I know everybody has their different takes. How do you guys do that?
Well, I'm going to talk about a perfect world scenario because
love perfect worlds.
What was easiest for Mark and me was when we were primarily the only therapist at our center at the time. I worked with a wife, he worked with a husband, and we worked with them together as a couple. The perfect scenario is we would also do full disclosure, the four of us together. And I say perfect because there aren't a lot of therapists that have a partner to work with when they're doing this. We happen to have people here that are in marriages, and they're both counselors or therapists or life coaches, and they are able to do it that way here. We have several others here. And we are also starting to work with disclosure between two therapists that might work with a couple separately, and we do put it together when we're working with them as a couple. That happens to be a high value for us here at Faithful and True. You can figure out things in other ways, but how we would have done it when Mark was here is that we would have met with a couple together, first of all. And when we met with them, we would just hear about their story. We would talk through, do a little exercise we do with them called the hula hoops, kind of look at the vision for where they want to go, how we see their process laying out, that mainly that he needs help and support himself through counseling, groups, and so forth. She ideally would have the same, and we would have that same support as couples. So there's like 3 equal pieces. We would lay out the plan, so we would not be doing any kind of full disclosure, then when they first come to us as new clients, because there are things we want them to experience first. Some wives really want it. That's the only reason they came. I want full disclosure. And we just tell them that that's really not how we do it. We want to prepare them well for it so that it serves them as a good thing in the long run, and it doesn't do damage to them when they don't have enough support or education or knowledge or sobriety. We need for him to be sober before we do full disclosure with someone. So there are a lot of things we need to get in place first. I'm not saying this takes a year or more or whatever, but certainly a number of months, I would say, ideally. So after that, if they talk about wanting to do full disclosure, we get them settled into their own individual counseling, ideally groups also, if they are willing to do that, because groups are a great place where they can also talk with others about what it's been like for them to go through full disclosure. Others who are on this journey have great ideas, in addition to a therapist, about maybe what you do want to know and what you don't want to know, because there are some things you don't want to know, but sometimes you don't know it when you're just getting through that hard stage. So when we assume they have all that in place, we also highly recommend, maybe we even request it, that a man goes through our 3-day workshop, because that allows him to be in a very different heart place, we find. A place where he's not blaming others for his addiction, particularly his wife, and he has owned that he has a problem and that he wants to be a truth teller. When we have a man who is in that place, then we have much greater likelihood that the truth, all the truth, will be shared. Because when someone feels like they're dragged into full disclosure, or they're still so mad that they really think this is their wife's problem, the issue with that is he will find a way to get around what he doesn't want to share. I mean, these are intelligent people, Tammy, so there's no way we can make them tell the truth. So we do that preparation, and then we take time to prepare each one of them. Mark would have prepared him with his timeline. That would have taken a couple of sessions probably, and he needs some time to do some of that research for himself. If he's one that constantly says, I can't remember, he may need to look up phone records or credit card records or talk to people who knew about what he was doing and interview them a bit about what was going on. And I prepare her for her part of it, which includes also knowing that she will have a time to ask questions in addition and after the fact that he shares. So this is not before or during his sharing, it's after the fact. Our hope would be that the majority of what she's going to ask gets answered in the disclosure. And then there are always these straggling things that were her reality, and maybe he wasn't aware of something that was important. So we allow for that, and we allow for a little time at the end of our 2-hour disclosure. That's the time we allow for it to wrap up, figure out next steps, and then eventually have a follow-up session for how they're doing. I think the timeline is interesting. 2 hours is what we allow for disclosure. And
that is interesting.
I hear couples talk about doing marathon 10-hour disclosures all through the night or whatever. And, you know, I don't know that we've ever really run out of time to do what we feel like we need to do with them. But they've taken the time to be succinct. And so it doesn't meander all over the place and get hijacked by conversations about this and that. And so, again, I think it works very well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds fantastic. And I want to speak for a moment to those who are listening and being like, yeah, that would have been great. That was not my experience, or there's no way my husband would do that. I just, like, my story, we did not go through that process. Like, I was like, you have 24 hours to sit down and write down everything that you've ever done. And we did it on the couch. And it was very much like, no, I want it now, and you're going to write it down. That led to a couple month drip disclosure or installment plan, as you would do, which was torturous. It was absolutely torturous. But I would say for those listening, we made it. So even if the full disclosure is not the perfect world, even if you didn't do it that way, or even if you didn't get it or installment, like you can still heal. But it does. The goal is you have got to have the truth, however that comes. And I think, Debbie, what you're describing is probably would have been a much, much kinder on my nervous system and on my heart going through the process. But man, what we need in the end is the truth.
Yeah. Well,
so
I want to add one thing to what you're saying, Tammy, is one of the things I know for sure after working all these years in this field, there is no one right way for everything.
That's so true, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
And like you said, sometimes we go the back roads, sometimes we go the highways, and you know what? Eventually, we can definitely get there. So here's self-disclosure. Mark and I didn't have disclosure like this.
Right.
I mean, I think we created it because it's something we felt like we knew would have helped. And
totally.
And I had
it's a gift.
Who was willing to go back anytime I needed to straighten out something that just popped into my head. And there are a lot of people that also don't live by that belief. You know, it's like, once this is done, it's done. We're not going back. That is not what we advocate for.
No,
because
me either.
You never know when something might come up. But, you know, we did it really more the slow and go place, but it worked as well. We did incredibly well. We also think this helps couples, like you said, maybe do it with a little more emotional support from other people and not be quite as painful, and it gets you where you're going a little bit quicker.
Well, and I so appreciate what you just said, Debbie, because I think you're right. I talk to a lot of women, and they're afraid of not doing it right. They're afraid it won't work if they don't do it the right way, or if they've done it a different way. And I just so want to reiterate what you're saying is there is no right way. Every one of us will have a little bit different viewpoint of how we do things, or how we help, or how we come at it. And that's okay. And if your journey, for those who are listening, if your journey is different, that's okay too. We're all headed in the same direction though.
Yes, right. One of the beauties about thinking about having help with this and having your husband offer
need help.
If you don't get full disclosure fairly soon in the process, you can't help but keep asking questions.
Yes.
And I tell wives that I'm working with, if these are burning questions keeping you up at night, then ask them.
Yeah.
And if they're not, write them down in a journal, keep them there, and know that your time will come to hopefully hear him offer the information to this, or then you can ask if you don't get it. But if you keep pounding him with questions and questions and questions, you miss the opportunity of the offering of information.
Oh, I totally pounded Nathaniel with questions. 100%. Oh my gosh, 100%. But you're right. Like, you're right. Him offering is great. Yeah. I also really appreciate what you said as far as this has to always be on the table. I mean, for it to really be healthy. Like, I'm really glad you said that. To this day, if I have something that I was like, wait a second, I just got triggered by something. What about that? It is always an open book. It's always on the table. And that provides so much safety. So that is something that women, you can ask for, and you can expect. That's not too much to ask. Of any time years down the road, it needs to be open. And that's also an indication he's worked through his shame too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because we keep growing closer when we can share anything and everything with each other. And it has no timeline to it when we do that. And it's a lovely, freedom that we can feel in our relationships when we know that that's the desire we both have.
What happens if he does not give the full truth, or even if he goes through whatever process of full disclosure? And by the way, I do want to say he will probably not give you the full truth unless he has somebody helping him through that. So I really do believe that he's got to have a therapist on board helping. Personally, I believe that. But let's say they get to the other side of full disclosure, and she's still like, I don't think I have everything. Mm-hmm. Like, what? Speak to those women.
Mm-hmm. And that's not unusual because, women say to me, if I've been lied to for, say, 15 years of my marriage, I think at some point what it also does is it dismantles our ability to trust ourselves and to know when we are being told by someone. And I think that takes a lot of practice and very slowing down our life to listen to those intuitive places, those hunches and so forth, and really not just skip by them or create some kind of belief that's not true, like, oh, it's probably my fault again, so, I won't even ask about it. We need to also learn how to trust ourselves better, but in that moment, after all that time of that not being the case, sometimes it's really helpful for wives to have a polygraph at that point. Mm-hmm. We're not huge believers in ongoing polygraphs because we desire to build emotional, spiritual, and physical intimacy with couples without having polygraphs do that for us. And I think as we get better at offering to each other, sharing our hearts, being vulnerable, we can tell a difference between someone who is not in that place on a regular basis and someone who is. It's hard to describe until you have the kind of growth that puts you in that place, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, life is very different for me now. However, before that time, I always say to her, you have another choice if you're just absolutely not convinced that you're getting the truth, and that would be to ask for a polygraph. And so generally speaking, our male therapist who's supporting the addict who's struggling will ask him if he's willing to do a polygraph for her. Almost by asking that question, it's enough. You don't have to almost even work through it, because his attitude towards that and wanting his wife to live in truth is going to be very telling. What we long to hear is, absolutely, I'll do that. I have to say, it scares me to death. And if that would help her, I would absolutely do that. And I don't care how much it costs. I want her to live in truth. Those are words we love to hear. And often do when we take the time to get our couples ready for full disclosure. This is not at that beginning stage where he's scared to death because she's going to leave most likely and she's madder than mad. And, that's where they're entering full disclosure. But if we hear that, then she still has a choice to go ahead with a process. We happen to have someone we work with here only with our couples who go through our process. And maybe others have them out there. It's really important to find somebody who is trustworthy himself.
Totally.
There are a lot of fly-by-night kind of polygraphers, unfortunately, who, again, have her list 40 questions, 50 questions. They pound the husband with that. And the problem is, from what we know with who we work with here, that's not condoned by the organization of polygraphers, sanctified, I should say. And finding someone who's doing this with integrity is going to be very important. And by the way, don't call us to ask in your area of the country who that might be, because I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know.
So we actually one of the interviews in this conference is actually with a polygrapher. So hopefully people can listen to that one if they want more information on that.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. One, I always tell women, like, if trusting your gut is so important, like trusting your gut is, if you think there's more, there probably is. Not all the time, but there probably is. So it's worth continuing to ask. And that polygraph, I had Nathaniel do a polygraph. He did it one time. And I needed that because I needed to know that I had everything. I needed to be, and that was like the foundation for really being able to move forward. And I think a lot of people think of polygraphs as, oh my gosh, that's so shocking, or that's so, it's punishment, or it's vindictive. Almost every wife I've ever worked with who has done a polygraph, they want their husband to pass, but they just need some other tool that will help them know that they can move towards safety. Something else outside of their husband who's lied to them, or their partner who's lied to them so much, to be able to say, okay, as much as humanly possible, we have everything now. So I really appreciate that.
One of the things we're all searching for in a perfect world is guarantees. We would love to have a guarantee that we have it all. We have all the information. There's nothing that's going to surprise us. We'd love a guarantee that no one's ever going to do this again. We want guarantees. And I think part of our process is learning how to trust not only ourselves, so that we're watching and listening for those hunches and also those thoughts that fly through our head. We're also examining where we come up with our beliefs about things. Like for a woman who has been sexually abused herself by numerous men. I've had this situation, a woman that came from another culture. It was very prevalent that women were abused this way. And one time she said to me, I've been so hurt by so many men. It's no wonder I will never be able to trust my husband. That was her thought. And she could have had 10 polygraphs, but in that place of all of her pain prior to the marriage, unless there was a ton of work or a ton of change or some men in her life so she could learn to trust, that was going to be hard to change for her. But I think also our guarantees is the part of our surrendering to God, our higher power, whatever it is you surrender to, knowing that as human beings, we are not capable of creating guarantees for ourselves or for others. Any of us could fall at any time and do things we don't want to do. And we can sure work hard, and our commitments can lead us, and our devotion to be the best person we can be. And it's not a guarantee, unfortunately. So
just such a hard truth.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it is true.
Polygraph is not 100% guaranteed because there's 5 or 10% of it that's considered inconclusive, which doesn't mean you pass or you're failed. It's just inconclusive. Unfortunately, I think a lot of wives might decide that means they failed, but that isn't what that means. There just is not enough evidence to really go one way or another in the results. So there again, we have, if a husband failed, or if there was 5% that just said it's inconclusive, how are we going to take that information and live with that? So many things to consider.
It's a great reason to have a support system around you to help process through all that. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. I'm sure you have benefited greatly from this discussion between Tammy Gustafson of Betrayal Healing Conference and Debbie Laaser, the Director of Faithful and True. If hearing this message has opened your eyes to a struggle that you've been going through, feel free to reach out to Faithful and True and visit our website at faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources that'll be helpful for you. If you're a man that's struggling with sexual addiction or pornography, any issues like that, we encourage you to look in to attending the Men's Journey Workshop. It's a 3-day event that we host every month here at Faithful and True. Go to faithfulandtrue.com, click on workshops, and then click on the Men's Journey Workshop, where you'll see all of the details regarding that event. There's also online registration available for you. So until then, we hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.